everybody, I'm Joe the Disney Guy, and we've looked at a lot of great projects in Disney history, be it rides, or movies, or TV shows, but what about those projects that never saw the light of day?
With all the projects that have been started at Disney throughout their history, there's always a few here and there that, for a multitude of potential reasons, either were never completed or just didn't turn out the way they were originally intended to. For me at least, these mysterious incomplete projects and concepts can be just as, if not more interesting than the projects that Disney did complete and release.
So with all that in mind, I think it's time that we take our first foray into the Disney that never was, by taking a look at a movie that many say is the greatest film that Disney never made, Chanticleer.
The story of Disney's version of Chanticleer started where so many Disney films started, with Walt and his crew searching for stories to adapt a film following the wild success of Snow White. One of those stories was the Alsace-Lorraine fairy tale of Reynard the Fox, but Walt was never able to adapt the story of the trickster fox due to his reservations about having a crook for a lead character.
And if all this sounds a little familiar, well, it should. We talked about it in the last video, which you can find right here.
Another story the Disney studio was looking at was Edmond Rostand's play about a rooster who believed that his crowing made the sun rise, Chanticleer. Walt liked the story of Chanticleer partially because of the barnyard setting, believing that the setting, in conjunction with the animals, gave a ton of comedic possibilities through animation, and put storymen Ted Sears and Al Perkins on the job of adapting the tale. But the problem that Sears and Perkins ran into was a very similar problem to that of Reynard the Fox. Chanticleer the rooster just wasn't a very good main character. Instead of being a crook, though, Chanticleer was just a very vain character, with his belief that he was the one who made the sun rise, leading to a very high level of self-importance.
I've always found this gripe to be a little interesting, because, at least in my mind, there's plenty of ways to make an audience care about a character, even if he is a little bit vain. It's certainly difficult, mind you, but I'm just surprised it ended up being the deal-breaker that it was in this case.
With issues plaguing the adaptations of both Reynard and Chanticleer, Walt decided to try and combine the two stories. The idea behind the move was simple. By making Reynard a villain, his natural characteristics can be preserved, and they won't necessarily have to make him a noble character. And with a natural villain acting as a foil, it may offset Chanticleer's vain characteristics, and make the audience like him more just from comparison.
Combining these two characters actually wasn't that unprecedented, as Chanticleer and the Fox was a fable that dated all the way back to the Middle Ages. Granted that the Chanticleer in that fable was slightly different than the one in Rostand's play, but the character was inspired by Rostand, so in my mind it still counts.
With the two tales combined, a story began to take shape, coupled with some concept art, but there were still major issues that the studio was struggling to resolve. Primarily that the story wasn't strong enough, and the characters still weren't sympathetic enough for an audience to get behind. With such major problems with the story, coupled with the amount of other projects in development, Walt decided to temporarily put the Chanticleer project on hold. But despite this, Walt clearly still had an interest in the project, and 3 different times throughout the 40s, in 1941, 1945, and 1947, Chanticleer was brought back up. But with funds low, World War II raging, and still no answers to the problems with the story and characters, the project fizzled out each time before being permanently cancelled as Walt shifted his attention to the opening of Disneyland in the 1950s.
That's definitely one of the unfortunate side effects of so much happening at the Disney companies, that sooner or later something just has to give, and the give in this case was Chanticleer. We all know that Walt was a wizard of storytelling, and I've no doubt that he could have figured out Chanticleer's story problems if he just had the time. But with so much going on at the Disney company going into the 50s, time wasn't exactly something that Walt had an abundance of.
Fast forward about 10 years, and Disney had just released 101 Dalmatians, a film that used a new, unique style that hadn't yet been seen in animation. Encouraged by this, Ken Anderson and Mark Davis wanted to move on to a new, big project, something that could really blow audiences away. Davis was a fan of theatricality and a Broadway style, and was looking to do something in that vein, but when he and Anderson looked at the other projects currently in development at the studio, nothing really caught their eye, so they instead moved on to the Animation Research Library to see what they could find. There, they came across the old drawings for Chanticleer, and both Davis and Anderson felt that there was big potential in the never-completed film.
Of course, the irony in all this is that Davis and Anderson felt that by bringing a Broadway style to an animated film, something that hadn't really been done before, it could be pretty successful. And when you look at the films of the Disney Renaissance, well, it's hard to say they were wrong.
Davis and Anderson brought their idea to Walt, who was thrilled with the idea of reviving Chanticleer, but cautioned the duo on the story issues that plagued the film. Davis and Anderson decided that the easiest way to solve the problems adapting the story to film would be to just not read the story at all, and instead use the characters to basically make their own story instead.
Now this may sound a little renegade-y, but remember, Walt literally used this exact same technique when adapting the Jungle Book, and that turned out alright, so it's not as crazy an idea as it sounds.
The story of Chanticleer followed a slow-witted yet beloved rooster who became mayor of his French farm, and slowly let the power of it go to his head, before the sneaky and deceitful Reynard comes to stoke the flames of discontent in an attempt to take power for himself. The story told a tale of the dangers of vanity, yet still kept Chanticleer as a likable protagonist throughout. Davis and Anderson felt that this simple story, coupled with fun, vibrant characters, as well as great humor and music, would produce a winner, and something that audiences hadn't really seen before. There were even 3 songs penned for the film, from composer George Bruns and lyricist Mel Levin. But although everything finally seemed to be coming together for Chanticleer, there were problems higher up in the company, where Walt was being encouraged to completely shut down the expensive animated film department. As a compromise, Walt agreed to scale back the animation department, which meant that he would have to shut down one of the 2 films in production at the time, Chanticleer and The Sword and the Stone. He chose to cancel Chanticleer.
We've talked a little about this decision in the past, you can find that video here, but there's actually a little bit more to this story than we originally discussed. You see, Davis and Anderson pretty much knew they were dead in the water when they first walked into their pitch meeting, because all the financial people were in the front and Walt was way in the back, because, as it turns out, Walt had actually canceled Chanticleer before Davis and Anderson ever got to make their pitch, due in large part to the amount of money and time it would have taken to make the movie. Walt always seemed to sort of be upset by this decision, because in a lot of respects it wasn't even his decision to make, it was the accountant's. So it goes, I guess.
Chanticleer had another gasp in 1981, when animator Mel Shaw proposed reviving the cancelled film, making the titular rooster an even more heroic and macho character, but it was shot down fairly quickly, again due to the cost it would take to make the film. But the legacy of Chanticleer continued to live on in Disney lore, as a lot of the character designs for the film were repurposed for Robin Hood, some other character designs were used in the America Sings attraction in Disneyland, and Reynard seems to have appeared again in Disney's most recent animated feature, Zootopia. The closest thing we have to a full-blown Chanticleer movie is Don Bluth's Rockadoodle. Bluth, while at Disney, had seen concepts for Chanticleer, and eventually put his own spin on the project, but the film was met with both poor reviews and audience reception.
So, that's the tale of Chanticleer, and many people still call it the greatest film that Disney never made, and honestly, I'm sort of inclined to agree with them.
When you look at the storyline and the characters, particularly from the 1960s attempt, you can see that there was a lot here that could have worked, and the fact that it not once but twice got shut down due to cost as opposed to substance, I think proves that. And who knows, maybe one day Chanticleer will be revived and we'll finally get this potentially classic movie. But until that day comes, we'll always just have to wonder what might have been.
Well guys, that wraps it up for me this week. Hope you all enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts on Chanticleer, and if there's any other canceled Disney projects you want me to look at, why don't you tell me about them in the comment section below. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my last video, my next video, and if you like taking a look at some of the behind the scenes of Disney, you want to check out A Disney History. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter for any news about the channel and myself. And I'll be sure to see you all real soon.